The hostess barely glanced at me before gesturing toward the far corner of the restaurant. The Blackwood family Christmas dinner is in the main dining hall, but your parents mentioned you'll be seated at the children's table in the side room. I stood frozen in disbelief, the elegantly decorated restaurant suddenly feeling suffocating despite its high ceilings and tasteful holiday decorations. This couldn't be happening. Not again. Not on Christmas Eve, in front of the entire extended family. The annual Blackwood family Christmas dinner was always a spectacular affair, but this year, it seemed my parents were determined to remind me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "I'm 32 years old. Why would I be seated at the children's table?" The hostess checked her tablet again, expression professionally blank, though I detected a hint of discomfort in her eyes. "I'm just following the seating arrangement provided by Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood. The note specifically says that Alexandra Blackwood is to be seated at the children's table." My brother's laughter cut through the awkward silence. "Oh, Alex, there. You are—" James appeared at my side, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that probably cost more than what most people made in a month. His wife Vanessa stood beside him, draped in designer winter white, her diamond earrings catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. "Is there a problem?" James asked, though his smirk made it clear he already knew. "The hostess says I'm seated at the children's table," I responded, watching his reaction carefully. James made a show of looking surprised, though his eyes gleamed with barely concealed amusement. "Well, that makes sense, doesn't it? You've always been the baby of the family." Before I could respond, my parents appeared. My father, retired Colonel Richard Blackwood, surveyed the scene with the same critical eye he'd once used to inspect military formations. My mother Elizabeth, her platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, diamonds adorning her neck and wrists, offered me a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "Alexandra, darling," my mother said, air-kissing my cheek. "You've finally arrived. We were beginning to wonder if you'd make it." "Why am I seated at the children's table?" I asked directly, refusing to play along with their charade of normalcy. My father's expression hardened. "The main table is for family members who have established themselves properly. Your cousins William and Charlotte are both successful attorneys now. James runs the family investment firm. Even your younger cousin Melissa just made partner at her accounting firm." He straightened his already perfectly straight tie. "When you've done something worthy of the Blackwood name beyond playing soldier in the desert, you can join the adults." The words hit like physical blows. Playing soldier. 8 years in the Marine Corps, 2 tours in Afghanistan, a Purple Heart, and building a successful business after discharge, all reduced to playing soldier. My mother touched my arm, her grip firmer than necessary. "It's Christmas, Alexandra. Let's not make a scene." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Besides, the children's table is more your economic level. We wouldn't want you feeling uncomfortable among discussions of investment portfolios and property acquisitions." I looked past her to the main dining hall where my relatives were gathering, champagne flutes already in hand. Uncle Robert, who had never served a day in his life but loved to pontificate about military strategy. Cousin William, who had dodged the draft in his day. My sister-in-law Vanessa, who once asked me if I had actually killed people with the same tone she might use to ask if I'd tried a new restaurant. And at the children's table, where I could now see my second cousin's kids, the oldest being perhaps 14, laughing and playing with the holiday crackers that had been set out for them. This was deliberate. This was my parents' way of reminding me that in their eyes, my service meant nothing. My business acumen meant nothing. I would always be the disappointment who had rejected the Blackwood family's carefully planned trajectory. "Fine," I said, surprising them with my calm acceptance. "The children's table it is." My mother's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly, clearly surprised I wasn't putting up more of a fight. In previous years, I might have. I might have argued, might have caused the scene they were all expecting. The scene that would confirm to everyone present that I was exactly what they thought. Unpolished, temperamental, unworthy of the Blackwood name. But not this year. This year was different. My father nodded curtly, satisfied that I was finally behaving appropriately. James shot me one last smug look before leading Vanessa toward the main table, where crystal glasses caught the light and expensive wines were already being poured. The hostess, clearly uncomfortable with the entire exchange, gestured toward the side room. "This way, Ms. Blackwood." As I followed her, I caught sight of the restaurant owner speaking with the head chef near the kitchen entrance. He hadn't seen me yet, but he would soon. And when he did, my dear family would learn that appearances could be deceiving. Very deceiving. Because while they thought they were putting me in my place, they had no idea that I owned the very ground beneath their expensive shoes. And by the end of the night, they would learn exactly who Alexandra Blackwood had become. Sat at the children's table, feeling the weight of humiliation settle over me like a heavy cloak. Around me, my second cousin's children looked between themselves and then at me with confusion in their eyes. The eldest, 14-year-old Mia, gave me a sympathetic glance. "Are you in trouble with Uncle Richard?" she whispered, leaning toward me conspiratorially. I forced a smile, determined not to let the children see how much this stung. "No, sweetheart. I think they just ran out of room at the big table." Mia frowned, her adolescent sense of justice clearly offended. "But there are 2 empty seats next to Aunt Elizabeth. I saw them when we came in." Of course there were. This wasn't about space. It was about making a point. My mother had orchestrated this entire seating arrangement with surgical precision, designed to inflict maximum humiliation. To remind me that despite my achievements, I would never truly belong among the Blackwood elite. Through the wide archway separating our side room from the main dining hall, I could see my family raising their crystal flutes in a toast. My father stood at the head of the table, commanding attention as he always did, his voice carrying even to our secluded corner. "To the Blackwood legacy," he announced. "To success, prosperity, and upholding the family traditions that have served us so well for generations." Everyone clinked glasses, their jewelry catching the light, their laughter sophisticated and measured. I noticed my mother's eyes flick briefly toward the children's table, a satisfied smile touching her lips when she confirmed I was watching. "Mission accomplished," that smile said. "Know your place." For a moment, I allowed myself to feel it all. The sting of rejection, the frustration of still being treated like the family disappointment despite everything I'd accomplished. The familiar anger bubbled up, threatening to overwhelm me. How many Christmas dinners had I endured like this? How many backhanded compliments about my little military adventure or my cute attempt at business had I swallowed along with my mother's overcooked turkey? 10-year-old Lucas tugged at my sleeve. "Are you okay, Cousin Alex? You look sad." I blinked, pushing the emotions back down where they belonged. "I'm fine, Lucas. Just thinking." "Mom says you were in the Marines and fought bad guys," piped up 8-year-old Emma, her eyes wide with admiration. "Is that true? Did you have a gun and everything?" Before I could answer, my brother James appeared at the entrance to our side. Room, champagne glass in hand. He leaned against the doorframe, observing the scene with barely disguised amusement. "Making friends with the only Blackwoods who'll listen to your war stories, Alex?" he asked, his voice carrying just enough to make the children shrink back in their seats. I kept my expression neutral. "Just catching up with my cousins." James sauntered over, resting his hand patronizingly on my shoulder. "Mother wanted me to make sure you're not filling the children's heads with inappropriate stories from your adventures." I could smell the expensive cologne on him, the same brand our father wore. James had always been the perfect carbon copy, right down to his mannerisms and worldview. The golden child who had never stepped out of line, never questioned the path laid out for him. We were just talking, I replied. Evenly. Good. He lowered his voice, leaning closer. Because you know how upset Mother gets when you start going on about the war. It's Christmas Eve, Alex. For once, try not to make everything about your service. Some of us have moved on with our lives rather than clinging to the past. The words were designed to cut, and despite my preparation, they did. Not because I cared what James thought, but because they reflected what my entire family believed. That my military service was something to be ashamed of, something to get over rather than a formative experience I carried with pride. I'll keep that in mind, I said, my voice steady. James straightened, satisfied that he'd delivered his message. Dinner is being served. Mother says the children can have their chicken fingers and fries now. He smirked. I believe they've prepared. The same for you, since we weren't sure if your palate had evolved since you left home. As if on cue, a server appeared with platters of children's meals. Chicken fingers, fries, and small bowls of macaroni and cheese were placed before each child. Then, with visible discomfort, the server placed an identical plate in front of me. Is there a problem? James asked, noticing my expression. I picked up a fry, examining it with deliberate casualness. Not at all. I was just wondering how much input you had in this particular humiliation. Or if it was all Mother's idea. A flash of something, annoyance, perhaps even guilt, crossed his features before his smug mask returned. Let's just say it was a family decision that you might be more comfortable with simpler fare. After all, the main course is Kobe beef. At nearly $200 per serving, it seemed wasteful to serve it to someone who probably can't appreciate the difference. The children had gone quiet, sensing the tension between us. Even little Emma seemed to understand that something mean was happening. You know what, James? I said, breaking the silence. You're right. I probably wouldn't appreciate it the way you do. I smiled, the expression not reaching my eyes. Some things are wasted on people who haven't earned them. He narrowed his eyes, uncertain if I was agreeing with him or sending a veiled message. Before he could respond, a commotion from the main dining room caught our attention. The restaurant's executive chef had emerged to personally introduce the main course to the Blackwood table, a Christmas tradition reserved for only the most elite patrons. James's attention shifted immediately. Don't worry, I'll tell you all about what you're missing, he said, already turning away toward the main event. As he walked back to join our parents, I checked my watch. 20 minutes. 20 minutes until Marcus would make his rounds of the dining room, as he did every Christmas Eve. 20 minutes until the first stage of my plan would unfold. I picked up a chicken finger and took a bite, surprising myself by how little the humiliation stung now. Perhaps because for the first time in my life, I knew something my family didn't. Something that would change everything. I ate my chicken fingers slowly, watching the main table through the archway. The children around me had warmed up after James left, chattering excitedly about their Christmas lists and school stories. They seemed more relaxed without the weight of Blackwood expectations pressing down on their small shoulders. I envied their freedom. Did you really fight in a war? Lucas asked, eyes wide with curiosity as he dunked a fry in ketchup. I did, I replied, keeping my voice even. I was a Marine. That's so cool, he exclaimed, causing several heads at the main table to turn our way disapprovingly. My dad says the military is for people who couldn't get into good colleges, but I think that's not true. I had to suppress a laugh at his innocent repetition of what was clearly my cousin David's opinion. Everyone serves for different reasons, I said diplomatically. I went to Georgetown before I enlisted, actually. Mia's eyes widened. But that's a really good school. Why would you join the military after that? Before I could answer, my mother appeared at our table, champagne flute in hand, her smile tight and controlled. Children, perhaps you could ask Alexandra about her. Little business instead, she suggested, her voice dripping with the particular brand of condescension she had perfected over decades. "She sells coffee or something similar, doesn't she?" I took a sip of water, refusing to rise to the bait. "Black. Dog coffee roasters," I said simply. "We have 8 locations now." My mother's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "How quaint. I suppose it keeps you busy after that unfortunate incident ended your military career." The incident she referred to so dismissively had been an IED explosion that had killed 2 of my squad members and left me with a purple heart, a medical discharge, and nightmares that still woke me in a cold sweat 3 years later. "The business is doing well," I replied, keeping my voice even. "We're expanding rapidly." "How lovely for you," my mother said, clearly uninterested in my success. "Perhaps next year you can bring some of your coffee for everyone. A little homemade gift would be charming." I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle her slightly. "Actually, Mother, I'd be happy to arrange something special. For the family tonight." A flicker of suspicion crossed her face, but before she could respond, my father's booming voice called from the main table. "Elizabeth! Marcus is making his rounds." My mother's attention immediately shifted to the tall, distinguished man in an impeccably tailored suit who had entered the main dining room. Marcus Chen, owner of the Sapphire Room, one of the most exclusive restaurants in Boston, was making his customary Christmas Eve circuit among his prestigious guests. "We mustn't keep Marcus waiting," my mother said with sudden urgency, clearly, forgetting whatever suspicions I had momentarily raised. The annual ritual of being acknowledged by Marcus Chen was far too important to miss. I watched as she hurried back to my father's side, her posture perfect, her smile transforming into the warm, welcoming expression she reserved for those she considered worthy of the Blackwood charm. The Sapphire Room had been my family's Christmas Eve tradition for as long as I could remember. My father had first brought us here when his military career had reached the rank that he felt entitled him to such luxury. Every year since, the sake, Blackwoods commanded the best table, ordered the most expensive wines, and made sure everyone knew they were regular patrons. Getting a reservation at the Sapphire Room during the holidays was nearly impossible, unless you were somebody, or knew somebody. The Blackwoods had always prided themselves on being the former. Little did they know I had become the latter. I watched as Marcus made his way around the main dining room, stopping at each table to exchange pleasantries. The Blackwoods were practically preening in anticipation of their moment. My mother touched her hair. My father straightened his already straight tie, and my brother James positioned himself to be prominently visible. "Is that man important?" Emma whispered to me, following my gaze. "He owns the restaurant," I explained quietly. "He's very successful." "Is he going to come say hi to us too?" she asked hopefully. I smiled at her, genuinely this time. "I think he will." The children perked up at this, suddenly sitting straighter in their chairs. Even at their young age, they had already absorbed enough of the Blackwood ethos to understand the social currency of recognition. I watched Marcus work his way methodically around the room, his manner perfectly calibrated to each table, deferential to the older money, warm to the regulars, graciously welcoming to the newcomers who had managed to secure a coveted holiday reservation. As he approached the Blackwood table, I could see my mother practically glowing with anticipation. My father stood to shake Marcus's hand with the perfect balance of camaraderie and condescension that he had perfected over decades of believing himself superior to those who served him. "Colonel Blackwood, always a pleasure," I could hear Marcus say as he clasped my father's hand. "And Mrs. Blackwood, lovely as always." My mother practically preened. "Marcus, darling, everything is exquisite as usual." I watched as Marcus made the appropriate small talk, complimenting my sister-in-law's dress, asking my brother about his latest business venture, acknowledging my various cousins and their spouses with practiced charm. And then, as my family basked in their annual moment of validation, Marcus's eyes drifted toward our side room. His polite smile faltered for just a moment as his gaze locked with mine, surprise flickering across his features before he caught himself. I gave him a small nod, and the slightest of smiles. "If you'll excuse me," he said to my family, his tone still perfectly courteous, "I should greet the rest of your party as well." My mother's smile froze. "Oh, that's just Alexandra and the children. No need to trouble yourself." But Marcus was already moving toward our table, leaving my mother staring after him in confusion. I could see my father's brow furrowing, my brother's eyes narrowing as Marcus walked purposefully toward the children's table. Toward me. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus approached our table with measured steps, his professional demeanor intact, but his eyes conveying a silent question. I gave him an almost imperceptible nod, confirming that yes, I was indeed sitting at the children's table, and yes, this was exactly the situation he thought it was. "Ms. Blackwood," he said, his voice warm but formal as he reached our table. "What an unexpected pleasure." I extended my hand, which he took without hesitation. "Hello, Marcus. Lovely to see you." The children watched this exchange with wide-eyed fascination. To them, the owner of this fancy restaurant knew their older cousin by name, something that clearly elevated me in their estimation. "I must say," Marcus continued, his voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the main table, "I was surprised not to see you at your usual table tonight." From the corner of my eye, I could see my mother's spine stiffen, her champagne glass pausing halfway, to her lips. "Oh, there was a slight change in seating arrangements this year," I replied smoothly. "I'm enjoying dinner with these delightful young Blackwoods instead." Marcus's gaze swept over the children's table, taking in the chicken fingers and fries with a barely perceptible raise of his eyebrow. "I see." He turned to the children with a warm smile. "And how are you enjoying your meal?" Mia, suddenly shy in the presence of an important adult, mumbled, "It's very good, sir." "The chicken is yummy," Emma added with childish enthusiasm. Marcus nodded seriously, as if this culinary review was as important as any critic's opinion. "I'm glad to hear it." Then he turned back to me, lowering his voice slightly. "Alex, I wasn't expecting you to be here as a guest tonight. Is everything all right with our meeting later?" The formality in his voice had dropped, replaced by genuine concern and just the right touch of familiarity. It was perfect. "Everything's fine," I assured him. "I thought I'd see how things were running from the customer side before we talk business. Getting a complete picture, you know?" Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. "Very wise. Your father's influence, I presume?" The colonel always struck me as a man who values seeing all aspects of an operation. At the mention of my father in such terms, I could practically feel the confusion radiating from the main table. My father, who had been mid-conversation with Uncle Robert, was now openly staring at us, his expression caught between bewilderment and suspicion. "Something like that," I agreed with a small smile. Though I like to think my military experience gave me my own perspective on leadership. "Undoubtedly," Marcus said with genuine respect in his voice. "Your insights have been invaluable. I could see my mother whispering urgently to my father now, her perfect composure fracturing slightly. James had set down his fork, all pretense of continuing his meal abandoned as he openly watched our interaction. "Will you still be here at closing?" Marcus asked, playing his part perfectly. "There are those staffing concerns I wanted to discuss. With you." "I'll be here," I confirmed. "Though I imagine my family might have questions before then." Marcus's lips twitched with the hint of a smile. "I imagine they might." He straightened, resuming his role as the consummate host. "Well, I won't keep you from your dinner any longer. Children, it was a pleasure meeting you all." The children beamed at being addressed so respectfully. Lucas even sat up straighter, clearly feeling important. "Oh, and Alex," Marcus added as an afterthought, though we both knew it was anything but. I had Chef Philippe prepare something special when I heard you might be joining us tonight. Not chicken fingers, I'm afraid? He smiled at the children conspiratorially. No offense to our younger guests, but I thought you might prefer the butter-poached lobster with truffle risotto that you enjoyed last time. Before I could respond, he signaled to a nearby server who promptly appeared with a covered silver dish. With a flourish worthy of the finest restaurants, the server placed it before me and removed the dome, revealing a beautifully plated gourmet meal that put the Kobe beef at the main table to shame? Chef's compliments, the server said with a slight bow. Please thank Philippe for me, I replied, aware that every eye in both rooms was now fixed on my plate. Marcus nodded, satisfaction evident in his eyes. Of course. Enjoy your meal, everyone. With that, he gave me one last knowing look before moving on to the next table. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. The children with their casual fare, me with a dish that clearly surpassed even what the adults were eating, all at the children's table that was meant to humiliate me. Little Emma stared at my plate in awe. That looks fancy, she whispered. Would you like to try a bite? I offered, cutting a small piece of the perfectly cooked lobster. She nodded eagerly, and I passed her a taste on a clean fork. Her eyes widened as she chewed. That's yummy. Way. Better than chicken fingers. I laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to break the spell that had fallen over both dining areas. At the main table, conversation resumed, but with a different energy, hushed, urgent, confused. My mother was now openly staring at me, her practiced society smile completely gone. My father was signaling for James to come over, presumably to demand an explanation. What just happened? Mia asked quietly. Why is everyone acting weird? I took a bite of the exquisite risotto, savoring both the flavor and the moment. I think the grown-ups are just surprised that the restaurant owner knows me. Do you come here a lot? Lucas asked, clearly trying to piece together the puzzle. I smiled at him. Something like that. As I continued eating my specially prepared meal, I watched James approach our table, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Phase 1 of my plan had been executed flawlessly. Now it was time for Phase 2, the confrontation. James reached our table with measured steps, his expression carefully controlled but tension evident in the set of his shoulders. He positioned himself directly across from me, placing both hands on the table and leaning forward slightly. The power stance he used in business negotiations. What exactly was that about? He asked, his voice low enough that the main table couldn't hear, but sharp enough to make the children shrink back in their seats. I took another bite of my lobster, chewing slowly and deliberately before responding. That was Marcus Chen, the owner. He was just saying hello. I know who Marcus Chen is, James snapped, his composure slipping. What I want to know is how he knows you, and why he's treating you like you're someone important. I set my fork down and dabbed at my lips with the napkin. Perhaps because I am someone important, James. His eyes narrowed. Don't play games, Alex. You sell coffee beans in a few neighborhood shops. That hardly puts you on a first-name basis with the owner of the Sapphire Room. Would you believe we met in a veterans support group? I asked, knowing full well he wouldn't. As expected, James scoffed. Please, Marcus Chen doesn't need group therapy. No, but his son did, I replied calmly. Captain Michael Chen, United States Marine Corps. We served in the same battalion in Afghanistan. This information visibly stunned James. He straightened, processing this unexpected connection. That doesn't explain why he's treating you like you're a VIP. Maybe I am a VIP, I suggested with a small shrug, taking another bite of the exquisite truffle risotto. James's expression darkened. Look, whatever game you're playing at, it needs to stop. Mother is upset, and you know how she gets when her Christmas Eve is disrupted. I glanced over at the main table where my mother was indeed watching us intently, her face a mask of controlled fury. My father appeared to be questioning Uncle Robert, probably asking if he knew anything about my connection to Marcus Chen. I'm not playing any game, I replied. I'm just enjoying my dinner, which I have to say is exceptional. Would you like to try some? I held out a forkful of lobster, a peace offering that we both knew was anything but. James ignored it. This is exactly why you're at the children's table. You always have to make everything about you. One Christmas, Alex. One Christmas without your dramatics. Is that too much to ask? I set my fork down again, all pretense of casualness gone. Dramatics? Is that what you call it when I refuse to be humiliated by our parents? When I don't just smile and nod while Mother suggests my military service was a waste of time, and Father pretends I don't exist unless he's explaining to someone why I'm such a disappointment. Keep your voice down, James hissed, glancing at the children who were watching our exchange with wide eyes. Why? I challenged. Afraid the next generation of Blackwoods might see that there's an alternative to blindly following the family script? James ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a rare gesture of frustration from someone who prided himself on never losing his cool. You've always been so dramatic. No one is trying to humiliate you. The table was crowded and— Stop. Lying, I interrupted, my voice still controlled but firm. There are 2 empty seats at the main table. This wasn't about space. This was about Mother making a point. What point would that be? James asked, feigning ignorance. That I don't belong, that I never have. I gestured toward the main table. Look at them, James. All of them sitting there in their designer clothes, talking about their investment portfolios and vacation homes. 8 years I spent serving this country, and to them, it's an embarrassment. Something to be swept under, the rug along with every other part of me that doesn't fit their narrow definition of success. A flash of something, guilt perhaps, crossed James's face before he masked it. You chose to enlist, Alex. No one forced you to reject the path that was laid out for you. The path laid out for me, I repeated with a quiet laugh. You mean working at Father's firm? Marrying someone from the right family? Living in a house 3 doors down from our parents and having Sunday dinners where we all pretend to be happy? James's jaw tightened. It's called tradition, family loyalty. It's called living someone else's life, I countered, and I refused to do it. And look where that got you, James said, gesturing to the children's table. 32 years old, and selling coffee while the rest of us have built something meaningful. I smiled then, a genuine smile that seemed to unsettle him. You have no idea what I've built, James. Before he could respond, a commotion at the main table drew our attention. My father had risen from his seat and was approaching Marcus Chen, who had just finished speaking with guests at another table. The set of my father's shoulders revealed his irritation, even from across the room. This should be interesting, I murmured, picking up my wine glass. James followed my gaze, alarm flashing across his features. What did you do? I didn't do anything, I replied honestly. But I think Father is about to learn a valuable lesson about making assumptions. We watched as my father intercepted Marcus, his hand extended in what appeared to be a friendly gesture, though I knew my father well enough to recognize the tension in his bearing. Marcus smiled politely, shaking his hand. Even from a distance, I could see the conversation growing increasingly intense. My father's gestures became more animated, while Marcus maintained his professional composure, occasionally glancing in my direction. James turned back to me, suspicion written across his features. What exactly is your relationship with Marcus? Chen? I took a sip of my wine, savoring the moment. That's between me and Marcus, don't you think? James leaned closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. If you've done something to embarrass this family, I swear— That's the thing about you, Blackwoods, I interrupted, setting my glass down with a soft clink. You're so concerned about appearances, about what others might think, that you never stop to consider that maybe, just maybe, you're not as important as you believe yourselves to be. The color rose in James's cheeks. "You're a Blackwood too, whether you like it or not." I looked him directly in the eyes. "Am I?" "Because from where I'm sitting, literally, it seems the family has made its position quite clear on that matter." Before James could formulate a response, my father was returning to the main table, his face flushed with what appeared to be a mixture of confusion and indignation. Marcus had moved on to other guests, but not before casting one more glance in my direction, a look that didn't go unnoticed by James. "I think your presence is required at the main table," I said to James, nodding toward our father, who was now gesturing urgently for him to return. James straightened his tie, composing himself. "This conversation isn't over." "No," I agreed, turning my attention back to my meal. "It's just beginning." As James retreated to the main table, I turned my attention back to the children. They had been watching our exchange with the wide-eyed fascination of young people witnessing adult drama unfold. "Are you fighting with Uncle James?" Mia asked, her voice small but her gaze direct. "Not fighting," I corrected gently. "Just having a disagreement." "About what?" Lucas piped up, never one to miss an opportunity for information. I considered how to respond. These children were innocent bystanders in the Blackwood family power dynamics, yet they were also being shaped by the same expectations and judgments that had made my childhood so stifling. "About choices," I finally said. "About how different people can take different paths in life, and that's okay." "My mom says you chose wrong," Emma said matter-of-factly, making me choke slightly on my wine. "She told my dad that you threw away your future to play soldier." Out of the mouths of babes. I set down my glass, studying Emma's innocent expression. She was simply repeating what she'd heard, with no understanding of the weight behind those words. "And what do you think, Emma?" I asked gently. She twisted a strand of hair around her finger, considering the question with surprising seriousness. "I think it's brave to be a soldier. My teacher says soldiers protect us, and that makes them heroes." I smiled, touched by her straightforward assessment. "Thank you, Emma." "Did you get hurt?" Lucas asked, his eyes wide with curiosity. "In the war?" I hesitated, conscious of the children's young ages but unwilling to lie. "Yes, I did, but I recovered." "Is that why you sell coffee now?" Mia asked, connecting dots in her young mind. "Because you couldn't be a soldier anymore?" "Partly," I acknowledged, "but also because I discovered I loved working with coffee. Sometimes when one door closes, you find another one that leads somewhere even better." At the main table, I could see my father engaged in intense conversation with James, both of them occasionally glancing in my direction. My mother's perfect posture had stiffened even further, her expression a carefully maintained mask that nevertheless couldn't quite hide her displeasure. Whatever my father had learned from Marcus had clearly disturbed their carefully choreographed evening. The server approached our table again, this time addressing me directly. "Ms. Blackwood, Mr. Chen asked me to ensure your wine glass remains filled." He topped off my glass with the same vintage being served at the main table, a $500 bottle that my father specifically requested each year. He also wanted me to inform you that he would be honored if you would join him briefly in his office after your meal. He mentioned something about the new contracts. I thanked him, aware that every word was being closely monitored by my family. The server departed, and I returned to my meal, aware that the temperature in the room seemed to have dropped several degrees. "Do you know the owner very well?" Mia asked, clearly impressed by the special treatment. "We've worked together on several projects," I said simply. "Is he your friend?" Emma asked. I smiled. "Yes, I suppose he is." "Then why didn't you tell Aunt Elizabeth you knew him?" Lucas inquired with the unerring logic of a child. "Then you wouldn't have had to sit at the kids' table." A fair question. Sometimes, Lucas, it's better to let people show you who they really are, rather than trying to change their minds. "I don't understand," he admitted. "You will when you're older." I promised. Him. Sometimes the people we love don't see us clearly. They see what they want to see instead of who we really are. Mia nodded as if this made perfect sense to her, and perhaps it did. Even at 14, she might already have experienced being misunderstood by the adults in her life. Through the archway, I saw my mother finally rise from her seat and begin making her way toward our table. Her stride was measured, her expression pleasantly neutral, but I recognized the subtle signs of her barely contained fury, the tightness around her eyes, the slightly too wide smile, the way her left hand lightly brushed against her pearl necklace, a nervous gesture she'd had since I was a child. "Children," I said quietly, "your grandmother is coming over. Why don't you tell her about what you want for Christmas?" They brightened at this suggestion, momentarily distracted from the undercurrents of tension. My mother arrived at our table, her perfume, always the same expensive French brand, announcing her presence before she spoke. "Alexandra," she said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. "May I speak with you privately for a moment?" "I'm enjoying my dinner, Mother," I replied, gesturing to my plate. "Chef Philippe outdid himself tonight." Her smile tightened. "It will only take a moment, dear." I considered refusing, but decided against it. This confrontation was inevitable, and perhaps it was better to have it away from the children's curious ears. "Of course," I conceded, rising from my seat. "Emma, would you watch my lobster for me? Make sure Lucas doesn't steal any." I winked at the boy, who giggled. "I'll guard it with my life," Emma promised solemnly. As I followed my mother to a quiet corner near the coat check, I caught Marcus's eye across the room. He gave me an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Whatever was coming, I was ready for it. My mother turned to face me, her smile dropping the moment we were out of sight of both tables. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. "Having Christmas dinner with my family," I replied calmly. "Isn't that what you invited me for?" "Don't be deliberately obtuse," she hissed. "Your father just spoke with Marcus Chen. He seems to be under the impression that you two have some sort of business relationship." I raised an eyebrow. "And that bothers you because it's obviously not true," she replied. "Whatever game you're playing, whatever you told that man to make him treat you like you're someone important, it stops now. You're embarrassing your father." I studied her face, the face I'd once desperately sought approval from, the face that had shown disappointment so often I'd memorized every variation of it. "What makes you so certain I'm not someone important, Mother?" My mother's perfectly arched eyebrows rose at my question, disbelief flashing across her features before she composed herself again. "Alexandra, let's not pretend. You run a few coffee shops, charming little places, I'm sure, but hardly the kind of enterprise that would put you in Marcus Chen's social circle. And what exactly do you know about my business, Mother?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "When was the last time you asked me how Black Dog Coffee Roasters was doing? Have you ever visited any of our locations? Do you have any idea what we've accomplished in the past 3 years?" She waved a dismissive hand. "Your father mentioned you had opened some new locations. Very entrepreneurial of you." The way she said entrepreneurial, like it was a disease one might catch from public restrooms, spoke volumes. 8 locations, I corrected her. Plus our roastery and training center. We employ over 70 people now, and we're expanding into 4 more cities next year. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, perhaps even a grudging respect, before her armor of disdain slipped back into place. "Well, that's all very nice, dear, but it hardly explains why the owner of the Sapphire Room is treating you like visiting royalty." I studied my mother's face, the face I'd known all my life, yet somehow never truly seen. Had she always been this dismissive? This determined to minimize anything that didn't fit her narrow definition of success? Or had I simply been too young, too desperate for her approval to notice? "Tell me, Mother," I said softly. What would it take for you to acknowledge that I might have built something valuable? That my path, different as it is from what you wanted for me, might actually have led somewhere worth going? Her eyes narrowed. Slightly. This isn't about your little coffee shops, Alexandra. This is about you causing a scene at our family Christmas dinner. Your father is mortified. Mortified that Marcus Chen knows me, or mortified that he put his daughter at the children's table, and now everyone in this restaurant can see what kind of man he really is. My mother's cheeks flushed with anger. How dare you? After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me? I interrupted, surprising both of us. I rarely challenged my mother directly. Since I left for the Marines, what have you done except criticize my choices and belittle my achievements? We gave you the best education money could buy, she snapped. We introduced you to the right people, tried to guide you toward appropriate opportunities. And what did you do? You threw it all away to go play soldier in the desert. There it was again. Play soldier. As if my service, the lives lost, the sacrifices made, were nothing but a child's game. I served my country, I said, my voice low, but firm. I led Marines into combat. I watched friends die. I came home with shrapnel in my shoulder and nightmares that still wake me up screaming. And when I finally found something that gave me purpose again, my business, you couldn't even be bothered to take it seriously. Don't be so dramatic, she huffed, but I noticed she didn't quite meet my eyes. Plenty of people serve in the military without making it their entire identity. Your cousin William's son is in the Navy, and he doesn't expect special treatment because of it. Lieutenant Junior Grade Thomas Williams serves on a destroyer based in San Diego, I replied evenly. He's never seen combat, never had to write letters to his friends' parents explaining why their children aren't coming home. But even if he had, I've never asked for special treatment because of my service. All I've ever wanted was basic respect. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. This conversation is getting us nowhere. Your father wants you to come apologize to Marcus Chen for whatever falsehoods you've told him. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A genuine, incredulous laugh that made my mother's eyes widen with surprise. Apologize to Marcus? For what, exactly? For whatever nonsense you've been feeding him about your relationship with our family, she said stiffly. For implying that you have some kind of connection to his restaurant. I shook my head, still smiling. Mother, I don't think you understand what's happening here. I don't need to apologize to Marcus. If anything, he might want an apology. From you. Her perfectly manicured hand flew to her pearl necklace, an unconscious gesture of self-protection. What are you talking about? Did father actually speak to Marcus? Or did he just ambush him with questions about me? She hesitated, just for a second, but it was enough. Your father simply asked him about this apparent familiarity between you two. And what did Marcus say? I pressed. Another hesitation. He was rather cryptic. Something about respecting confidentiality until the official announcement. Your father assumed he was just being polite while avoiding admitting that he barely knows you. I nodded slowly. That sounds like Marcus. Always professional. My mother studied my face, suspicion gradually replacing irritation in her expression. Alexandra, what have you done? There was something in her tone, a flicker of uncertainty, perhaps even a hint of fear, that might have satisfied me once. Years ago, I might have savored this moment, this tiny crack in my mother's impenetrable certainty that I would never amount to anything worth mentioning. But standing there, watching her struggle to maintain her worldview in the face of evidence that something wasn't quite as she believed, I felt an unexpected emotion, pity. I built something, Mother, I said simply. Something I'm proud of, something that matters. Your coffee shops? She asked, but her voice lacked its usual dismissive edge. Among other things. She stared at me for a long moment, really looking at me perhaps for the first time in years. Why are you being so mysterious? If you've achieved something significant, why not simply say what it is? I considered the question. Why was I drawing this out? Was it petty revenge for years of dismissal? A childish desire to make my big reveal as dramatic as possible? Perhaps. But it was also something more. Because I wanted you to consider something first, I replied. I wanted you to ask yourself why you're so certain that I couldn't have accomplished anything worthy of your respect. Why, when faced with evidence that someone like Marcus Chen values my business acumen, your first assumption is that I must be lying or playing some kind of game? My mother's gaze faltered, dropping to fix on a point somewhere over my shoulder. You've always been different, Alexandra. Stubborn. Determined to do things your own way, even when it wasn't in your best interest. And it never occurred to you that maybe, just maybe, I knew what I was doing. That my path, different as it was from what you wanted from me, might lead somewhere valuable? She didn't answer immediately, and in her silence, I saw a lifetime of rigid expectations and narrow definitions of success. My mother wasn't a cruel person, not really. She was simply incapable of imagining a world where the rules she lived by, the social hierarchies, the approved career paths, the right connections, weren't the only route to a meaningful life. Whatever you've done, she finally said, her voice stiff but not unkind, I hope it's made you happy. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really an acknowledgement. But coming from Elizabeth Blackwood, it was practically a concession speech. It has, I assured her. Now, shall we return to our respective tables? The children are probably wondering where I've gone, and I believe Father is waiting for a report. My mother straightened her already perfect posture, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her designer dress. We'll continue this discussion later. Your father still expects you to clear up whatever misunderstanding exists. I smiled, feeling strangely, There's no misunderstanding, Mother, just incomplete information, and that will be resolved very soon. As we turned to go our separate ways, she to the main table, I to the children's corner, Marcus caught my eye from across the room and tapped his watch discreetly. It was almost time for the final act of the evening. Mother, I called after, her retreating form. She paused, looking back at me with a question in her eyes. You might want to save room for dessert. I have a feeling it's going to be quite spectacular tonight. I returned to the children's table where Emma immediately reported that she had successfully guarded my lobster from Lucas's wandering fork. I thanked her solemnly for her service, which made her beam with pride. As I settled back into my seat, I noticed the main table had fallen into hushed conversation, with occasional glances thrown in my direction. My father's face had taken on the stony expression he reserved for situations beyond his control. The same look he had worn when I announced my enlistment in the Marines 12 years earlier. What did Grandma want? Mia asked, ever observant. She was just checking that I was enjoying my dinner, I replied, not wanting to burden the children with adult conflicts. Mia's skeptical expression made it clear she didn't believe me, but she let it drop. Smart girl. She'd already learned that Blackwood family dynamics operated on a level of subtext and polite fiction. I checked my watch discreetly. 20 minutes until Marcus would make his announcement. 20 minutes until the careful hierarchy my parents had constructed would be permanently disrupted. Are you really friends with the restaurant man? Emma asked, leaning toward me conspiratorially. I am, I confirmed. Mr. Chen and I have known each other for 3 years. Is he nice? She pressed. I smiled. Very nice and very smart. He built this entire restaurant from nothing. Like you built your coffee shops? Lucas interjected, surprising me with his attentiveness. Something like that, I agreed. We both started businesses that grew bigger than people expected. Mia twirled her fork thoughtfully. Is that why Grandma and Grandpa are mad? Because your coffee shops are successful? The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. It's complicated, Mia. Sometimes adults have certain expectations, and when those expectations aren't met in exactly the way they imagined, they have trouble adjusting. Like when Mom expects me to get all A's, but I get a B in math, and she acts like I failed everything, Mia suggested. I suppressed a laugh at the apt comparison. That's not a bad analogy. The difference is that I didn't get a B, I just took a different class altogether. And they're mad about that? Lucas asked, his young face scrunched in confusion. They're disappointed that I didn't follow the path they had planned for me, I explained, trying to put it in terms a 10-year-old might understand. They wanted me to work at Grandpa's company and live a certain kind of life, but I chose something different. The Marines, Emma stated proudly, clearly having latched onto this detail. Yes, the Marines first, and then my coffee business after that. I think that sounds cool, Lucas declared firmly. Dad says we have to follow our passions. That's why he lets me play soccer instead of tennis, even though Grandpa says tennis is a gentleman's sport. I smiled at this small example of progress in the next generation. Maybe my cousin David wasn't completely under my parents' influence after all. Your dad is right, I told him. Following your passion is important. Is coffee your passion? Mia asked. I considered the question, appreciating its thoughtfulness. Part of it, I answered honestly. But mostly, I'm passionate about building something meaningful, creating jobs for people who need them, making spaces where people feel welcome. Like, this restaurant? Emma asked, looking around at the elegant surroundings. Similar, yes, I nodded. Places where people come together, share good food or drinks, connect with each other. From across the room, I could see the kitchen doors swing open as servers began to emerge with dessert trays. Marcus appeared as well, conferring quietly with his head server before glancing in my direction with a subtle nod. It was time. I gently placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. Excuse me for a moment, kids. I need to speak with Mr. Chen. Are you in trouble? Lucas asked worriedly. I smiled reassuringly. Not at all. Just some business to take care of. As I made my way across the dining room, I could feel multiple pairs of eyes tracking my movement. My father half rose from his seat before my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm, whispering something that made him reluctantly sink back down. James watched with narrowed eyes, while various aunts, uncles, and cousins pretended not to stare while doing exactly that. Marcus met me halfway, his professional demeanor firmly in place, though I could detect the hint of amusement in his eyes. Alex, he greeted me warmly. Shall we proceed? I believe it's time, I agreed. Together, we walked to the center of the main dining room, where Marcus discreetly signaled to a server who immediately produced a small chime. The musical note rang out clearly, catching the attention of all diners. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the now quiet restaurant. Thank you all for choosing to spend your Christmas Eve with us at the Sapphire Room. It's our honor to host your holiday celebrations. Polite applause rippled through the room. As is our tradition, we have a special holiday dessert prepared. By Chef Philippe, Marcus continued. But before we serve it, I hope you'll indulge me for a moment as I make a special announcement. I could see my father shifting uncomfortably in his seat, clearly concerned about what might be coming. My mother's smile had frozen in place, her fingers gripping her wine glass a bit too tightly. 3 years ago, Marcus went on, the Sapphire Room was at a crossroads. We had established ourselves as one of Boston's premier dining destinations, but like many restaurants, we faced challenges in an increasingly competitive landscape. The dining room was utterly silent now, all eyes fixed on Marcus as he spoke. It was at this critical juncture that I was fortunate enough to meet someone who shared my vision for elevating the culinary scene in this city, someone with both the strategic insight and the financial resources to help take the Sapphire Room to new heights. Marcus turned slightly, gesturing toward me. Many of you know Alexandra Blackwood as a decorated Marine veteran and the founder of Black Dog Coffee Roasters. What you may not know is that for the past 3 years, she has also been my business partner and the majority stakeholder in the Sapphire Room restaurant group. The silence in the room deepened, if that were possible. At the Blackwood family table, my father's face had gone pale, my mother's rouge standing out starkly against her suddenly bloodless complexion. James's mouth had actually fallen open, a look of complete shock I hadn't seen since we were children. Together, Marcus continued smoothly, we have expanded from this single location to a restaurant group that now includes 5 distinct dining concepts across New England. And tonight, I'm pleased to announce that in the new year, we will be opening our first international location in London. Murmurs of impressed surprise swept through the room. Several patrons at nearby tables turned to look at me with new interest. None of this would have been possible without Alex's vision, determination, and exceptionally keen business acumen, Marcus said, his genuine respect evident in his tone. She has been the driving force behind our expansion strategy, and her financial expertise has transformed what was once a single successful restaurant into an international hospitality brand. He turned to me with a warm smile. Alex, would you like to say a few words? I hadn't planned to speak. The announcement itself was supposed to be enough. The public recognition of my success, the undeniable evidence that I had built something substantial beyond my family's narrow imagination. But standing there, feeling the weight of my family's stunned stares, I realized there was more to say. Thank you, Marcus, I began, my voice steady. When I returned from Afghanistan 3 years ago, I was at my own crossroads. I had my coffee business, which was beginning to thrive, but I was looking for new challenges, new ways to grow. Meeting Marcus and discovering our shared vision for creating exceptional hospitality experiences was truly transformative. I paused, allowing my gaze to sweep across the room before landing briefly on my family's table. The Sapphire Room holds a special place in my heart. My family has been coming here for Christmas Eve dinner since I was a child. It seems fitting that this restaurant, which has been the setting for so many Blackwood family memories, should now be part of the legacy I'm building. I could see the impact of my words rippling across my family's faces, the dawning realization that the very restaurant they had used to try to put me in my place was, in fact, partly mine. That while they had been dismissing my coffee shops as a hobby, I had been quietly building an empire they hadn't even noticed. I'm exceptionally proud of what we've accomplished, I continued, and excited for what lies ahead. The London opening is just the beginning of our international expansion. We've secured locations in Paris and Tokyo for late next year, and are in negotiations for sites in Singapore and Dubai. My father, who had spent his entire career trying and failing to expand his investment firm internationally, seemed to age before my eyes. But more than the growth itself, I'm proud of how we've grown, I added. Our restaurants employ over 300 people, many of them veterans like myself. We provide comprehensive health care, educational assistance, and profit sharing to all employees. We've established a foundation that provides culinary training and job placement for wounded warriors transitioning to civilian life. I smiled, feeling a genuine surge of pride. That's the real measure of success to me. Not just building wealth, but creating opportunity. Not just serving excellent food, but serving the communities we're part of. This wasn't part of the script. We'd planned, but Marcus was nodding approvingly beside me. He understood what I was doing. Not just announcing my position, but defining success in terms that stood in direct contrast to the Blackwood family values. Thank you all for your attention, I concluded. Please enjoy your dessert, and from the entire Sapphire Room team, we wish you a very happy holiday season. Applause broke out across the dining room, genuine and enthusiastic. Several patrons raised their glasses in a spontaneous toast. Marcus signaled to the servers, who began bringing out elaborately plated desserts, including to the children's table, where I could see Emma, Lucas, and Mia watching with wide-eyed excitement. As the applause faded and conversations resumed, I turned to Marcus. "Thank you. That was perfect." He smiled, clasping my shoulder briefly. "You earned this moment, Alex. Every bit of it." As I prepared to return to the children's table, I caught sight of my father rising from his seat and making his way toward us, his expression unreadable. The confrontation I had been both anticipating and dreading was about to begin. My father approached with military precision, each step measured and deliberate. Though he had been retired from the Corps for over 15 years, Colonel Richard Blackwood still carried himself with the ramrod straight posture and stern countenance that had intimidated countless junior officers and his own children. "Alexandra," he said, his voice controlled but tight. "A word." Marcus gave my shoulder a supportive squeeze before tactfully stepping away to oversee the dessert service. My father waited until Marcus was out of earshot before fixing me with the steely gaze that had once made me tremble as a child. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, keeping his voice low despite the evident fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. "I believe Marcus made it quite clear," I replied calmly. "I'm his business partner and the majority stakeholder in the Sapphire Room restaurant group." "That's impossible," my father stated flatly. "You don't have that kind of capital. The Sapphire Room alone is worth millions, not to mention these other restaurants he mentioned." I smiled slightly. "You'd be surprised what I have, Father." His eyes narrowed. "Is this some sort of elaborate deception? Some misguided attempt to embarrass your family on Christmas Eve?" The suggestion was so typical of him, the immediate assumption that any success I claimed must be fabricated, that my primary motivation would be to embarrass the almighty Blackwood family. "I assure you, it's entirely legitimate," I said. "I've owned 51% of the Sapphire Room for 3 years. The expansion to the additional New England locations began 2 years ago. London opens in February." My father's jaw tightened. "With what money? Your coffee shop venture couldn't possibly generate that kind of investment capital, even if it were moderately successful." I could have been offended by his dismissal of Black Dog Coffee Roasters, which had grown from a single location to a thriving regional chain with a robust wholesale business. But I had anticipated this reaction. The inability to conceive that I could build something valuable without the Blackwood name and connections behind me. "Do you remember Captain Eric Wilson?" I asked, changing tack. My father frowned at the apparent non sequitur. "Your commanding officer in Afghanistan? The one who was killed?" "Yes," I confirmed, impressed despite myself that he had remembered this detail. "What you may not recall is that Eric and I attended officer candidate school together. We became close friends, served multiple tours together. What does this have to do with—" "Eric came from money," I continued, cutting him off. "Old Texas oil money. When he was killed by that IED, he left no immediate family. His parents had died years earlier, and he was an only child." Understanding began to dawn on my father's face. "Eric left his entire estate to be divided among the surviving members of our unit," I explained. 5 of us. I received a little over $18 million. My father's composure slipped, genuine shock registering in his widened eyes and slightly parted lips. $18 million? I used $2 million to launch Black Dog," I continued. "The name is a tribute to Eric. His call sign was Black Dog. The business became profitable within 14 months. I reinvested most of the profits and used another portion of Eric's bequest to buy into the Sapphire Room when Marcus was looking for a partner." My father stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. In a way, perhaps he was. He had been so locked into his perception of me as the wayward daughter, the family disappointment, that he had never bothered to look beyond the surface of my life after I rejected the path he had laid out for me. "Why didn't you tell us?" he finally asked, his voice holding a note I rarely heard from him. Uncertainty. "Would you have believed me?" I countered. Or would you have assumed I was exaggerating or lying outright? Would you have respected me more knowing I had money when you never respected my service or my work? He had no immediate response to that, which was answer enough. Besides, I added, I wanted to see what I could build on my own, without the Blackwood name opening doors. I wanted to know if I could succeed based on my own merits. And clearly you have, he acknowledged grudgingly. From anyone else, it might have seemed like faint praise. From Colonel Richard Blackwood, it was practically effusive. Yes, I have, I agreed. Though that success meant nothing to you half an hour ago when you put me at the children's table. A flash of something that might have been shame crossed his features before he masked it. Your mother arranged the seating. She thought, I know exactly what she thought, I interrupted. What both of you thought. That I was still the family disappointment. That my service was just a phase, my business just a hobby. That I could be placed with the children because I hadn't earned my place at the adults' table. My father straightened his already impeccable tie, a gesture I recognized as his tell when feeling defensive. Your choices disappointed us, Alexandra. You were raised for greater things than serving coffee. I laughed then, a genuine sound that drew glances from nearby tables. Greater things? Father, I employ 73 people at Black Dog alone, 300 more across the restaurant. Group. I've created a veterans foundation that's helped over 200 former service members build new civilian careers. I own one of the most exclusive restaurant groups on the East Coast, which is about to expand internationally. I took a step, closer, lowering my voice. But none of that matters to you, does it? Because it wasn't done the Blackwood way. Because I didn't follow your plan. You could have told us about the inheritance, he insisted, sidestepping my accusation. About your success. Why? I challenged. So you could finally approve of me because I had money? So you could claim credit for my achievements as if they were somehow the result of your parenting? Or perhaps so you could try to take control, the way you always have, telling me how to invest, which connections to cultivate, which opportunities to pursue? My father's expression hardened, confirming my suspicions. That was exactly what would have happened. I made my own way, I said firmly. I built businesses I'm proud of on my terms. I don't need your approval, Father. I never did. His jaw worked silently for a moment, as if chewing on words he couldn't quite bring himself to say. Finally, he asked, was this whole evening some sort of revenge, then? A scheme to humiliate your family in public? The question struck me as so fundamentally misguided that I almost pitied him. After everything that had transpired, he still couldn't see beyond his own wounded pride. No, Father. This evening was your doing, not mine. I came to Christmas dinner in good faith, despite years of subtle and not-so-subtle insults. I arrived expecting to be treated with basic dignity and respect, only to be seated at the children's table. The humiliation was your choice, not mine. Gestured toward the dining room where dessert was being served and conversation had resumed. The announcement was already scheduled for tonight. Marcus and I have been planning the London opening for months. The timing was coincidental, though. I won't pretend I'm not satisfied by it. My father's gaze shifted over my shoulder, and I turned to see my mother approaching, her expression a careful mask of pleasant neutrality that did nothing to hide the tension in her bearing. James trailed behind her, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. Richard, my mother said, her voice pitched for privacy despite her smile. Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more appropriate. My father nodded stiffly. Alexandra was just explaining her situation. My situation? I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. You mean my successful business empire that you never bothered to notice? The one that now owns the very restaurant where you've been trying to put me in my place for years? There's no need to be dramatic, my mother chided, glancing around to ensure we weren't attracting attention. We're simply surprised. You might have mentioned these developments at some point. James stepped forward, his typical confidence noticeably diminished. $18 million, he said, his voice holding a note of disbelief. And you used it to buy coffee shops and restaurants? I turned to him, one eyebrow raised. As opposed to what, James? Funneling it into father's investment firm? Buying my way into the Blackwood family's good graces? He had the grace to look somewhat abashed. I just meant, it's an unusual choice for someone with that kind of capital. Not really, I countered. Hospitality is a growth industry, especially in the premium sector. The Sapphire Room Group has seen 28% year-over-year growth since our partnership began. Black Dog has expanded from 1 location to 8, with plans for 6 more next year. Our wholesale business supplies coffee to over 300 restaurants and cafes across New England. I couldn't help but take some satisfaction in their stunned expressions. For years, they had dismissed my business ventures as inconsequential, glorified, hobbies that kept me occupied after my military career ended. Now they were finally seeing the truth. We should discuss this as a family, my mother said firmly. Perhaps you could join us at the main table now, Alexandra. There's still time for dessert. I almost laughed at the transparent attempt to save face. Now that they knew I had money and status, suddenly I was worthy of the adult table. Thanks. But I promised Emma, Lucas, and Mia I'd have dessert with them, I replied. They've been much better company this evening. My mother's smile tightened. Alexandra, don't be childish. This is an important family discussion. No, Mother, I said calmly. This is Christmas Eve dinner. Any business discussions can wait. For another time. Preferably one where I'm not seated at the children's table as an opening gambit. Before she could respond, Marcus reappeared at my side. Excuse the interruption, he said smoothly. Alex, the team from London is on the video. Call in my office. They're eager to discuss the final details for the February opening. I nodded gratefully, appreciating his perfectly timed intervention. Of course. I'll be right there. Turning back to my parents and brother, I added, if you'll excuse me, business calls. On Christmas Eve? My mother asked incredulously. International. Expansion doesn't observe holidays, I'm afraid, I replied. The London team has been working through their Christmas to ensure we meet our timeline. Without waiting for a response, I turned to follow Marcus, pausing only to add over my shoulder. Enjoy your dessert. I recommend the crème brûlée. We imported the vanilla beans directly from Madagascar. As I walked away, I could feel their eyes on my back, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely free of the weight of their expectations and judgments. I had nothing left to prove, not to them, and more importantly, not to myself. Marcus led me through the bustling kitchen, where Chef Philippe gave me a quick nod of acknowledgement as he oversaw the plating of the elaborate Christmas desserts. The kitchen staff moved with practiced precision, a well-choreographed dance of culinary expertise that always impressed me. 3 years of partnership had given me a deep appreciation for the behind-the-scenes magic that made the Sapphire Room exceptional. There's no London team on a call, I said once we were in the quiet hallway leading to his office. Marcus smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Of course not. It's 3 a.m. in London, but your family doesn't know that. I laughed, feeling a tension I hadn't fully acknowledged begin to release. Thank you for the rescue. You looked like you needed an exit strategy, he replied, opening the door to his office. Besides, I thought you might want a moment to decompress before rejoining the dinner. That announcement went perfectly, by the way. The look on your father's face was... He trailed off, searching for the right word. Priceless? I suggested. I was going to say illuminating, Marcus corrected with diplomatic tact. I've known your father as a customer for 15 years, Alex. I've never seen him caught off guard like that. I settled into one of the comfortable leather chairs facing Marcus's desk, releasing a long breath. Honestly, I'm not sure what I expected. Shock, certainly. Maybe anger. But there was something else there, too. I paused, trying to identify the emotion I'd glimpsed beneath my father's rigid exterior. Disappointment, perhaps. Not in me for once, but in himself. For missing what was right in front of him. Marcus nodded thoughtfully as he took the seat behind his desk. The most painful realizations are often the ones that force us to confront our own blind spots. He studied me for a moment. "How are you feeling?" It was a simple question, but one that required careful consideration. How did I feel? The initial rush of satisfaction at seeing my family's shocked expressions had faded, leaving something more complex in its wake. "Vindicated," I said finally, but also sad in a way. All these years, all I ever wanted was for them to see me, to really see me, not the disappointment they believed I was. Now they see the success, the money, the status. But I'm not. Sure, they see me even now. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Does that matter to you still? Their recognition? I considered the question carefully. 3 years ago, when I'd first returned from Afghanistan, wounded in body and spirit, their approval had still mattered desperately. Their rejection of my military service, their dismissal of my nascent coffee business, each slight had cut deeply. But somewhere along the way, as both Black Dog and our restaurant partnership flourished, that need had diminished. Less than it once did, I admitted, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't matter at all. They're still my family. Family is complicated, Marcus agreed, his expression thoughtful. My own father didn't speak to me for 2 years after I dropped out of medical school to attend Culinary Institute. He had planned on having a doctor for a son, not a chef. This was a story I'd heard before, but it resonated differently tonight. But he came around eventually? He did, Marcus confirmed. The first time he ate at my restaurant, my first little place in Chinatown, not even a quarter the size of the Sapphire Room, he finally understood. He saw that I had built something meaningful, something that brought joy to people. He smiled at the memory. He became my biggest supporter after that. I'm not sure my parents are capable of that kind of transformation, I said, unable to keep the note of sadness from my voice. Their worldview is too rigid, too embedded in hierarchy and status. People can surprise you, Marcus said gently. Give them time to process. This is a significant adjustment to their understanding of who you are. I nodded, appreciating his perspective, but not entirely convinced. The Blackwoods had elevated stubbornness to an art form. My father's military career had reinforced his natural tendency toward rigidity, and my mother's social climbing had calcified her values into immutable laws. They might acknowledge my financial success, but accepting the path I'd taken to achieve it was another matter entirely. We should get back, I said, glancing at my watch. I promised the kids I'd have dessert with them. Marcus stood, adjusting his impeccable suit jacket. The children's table, where the real conversations happen. His eyes twinkled with amusement. I've always found young people to be more honest dinner companions anyway. They've been delightful, I agreed, rising from my chair. Emma wants to be a Marine when she grows up now. My Aunt Patricia will be horrified. We shared a laugh as Marcus opened his office door. Before stepping into the hallway, I paused, turning back to face him. Thank you, I said with genuine feeling. Not just for tonight, but for everything these past 3 years. For seeing potential in me when my own family couldn't. Marcus clasped my shoulder briefly, his expression warm. I didn't give you anything you hadn't earned, Alex. I recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood that true hospitality is about creating experiences that matter, moments that connect people. He smiled. Besides, it was an excellent business decision. Our partnership has been remarkably profitable. That it has, I agreed with a smile of my own. As we made our way back toward the dining room, I could see through the kitchen windows that dessert service was in full swing. At the children's table, Emma was demolishing a chocolate soufflé with the single-minded focus only an 8-year-old could muster. Lucas appeared to be constructing some sort of architectural wonder with his crème brûlée, while Mia was in animated conversation with a server who was showing her how to properly pour the warm sauce over her molten chocolate cake. The main table presented a markedly different scene. My parents sat stiffly side by side, barely touching their desserts as they engaged in what appeared to be a tense, hushed conversation. James was on his phone, typing furiously, researching me, perhaps, or possibly already reaching out to connections to confirm my story. Various aunts, uncles, and cousins alternated between sneaking glances at me and leaning toward each other in whispered exchanges. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. At one table, genuine enjoyment of the moment. At the other, a tangled web of social calculations and wounded pride. "I believe I'll join you at the children's table for dessert, if I may," Marcus said, following my gaze. "I'd like to hear more about Emma's military aspirations," I smiled gratefully. "I'm sure she'd be thrilled to tell you all about it." As we approached the children's table, Emma spotted us first, her face lighting up. "Mr. Restaurant Man, are you having dessert with us too?" Marcus laughed at the nickname. "I'd be honored to join you if that's all right. And please, call me Marcus." "We saved a chair," Lucas announced proudly, pointing to an empty seat that a server had apparently added to their table. "Alex said you might come sit with us because the grown-up table is too boring." I shot Marcus an apologetic glance, but he merely chuckled. "Alex is absolutely right. The children's table is always where the interesting conversations happen." As Marcus settled into the offered chair, immediately engaging the children in conversation about their desserts, I caught sight of my mother watching the scene with an expression of utter disbelief. The owner of the Sapphire Room, a man whose attention she had cultivated for years, was choosing to sit at the children's table rather than joining the illustrious Blackwoods at the main table. The final reversal of status was complete. The children's table, intended as my place of exile, had become the center of gravity in the room. The place of honor. I took my seat beside Emma, accepting the spoonful of chocolate soufflé she insisted I try. "It's the best thing I ever tasted," she declared solemnly. "Even better than birthday cake." "High praise indeed," I agreed, savoring the rich chocolate as I caught Marcus's eye over the children's heads. He raised his water glass in a subtle toast, acknowledging the perfect symmetry of the moment. The evening had come full circle. What had begun as an attempt to diminish me had transformed into a powerful reminder of what truly mattered. Not the trappings of status, or the approval of those too narrow-minded to see beyond their own prejudices, but the authentic connections we build and the legacy we create on our own terms. As I shared dessert with the children and Marcus, listening to their unfiltered observations and earnest questions, I realized I had found my place at the table after all. Not the one my parents had assigned me, but the one I had chosen for myself. Dessert with the children had been the highlight of the evening. Their unfiltered enthusiasm and genuine curiosity were refreshing after decades of navigating the carefully constructed facades of Blackwood family gatherings. Emma had proudly shown Marcus her perfect technique for cracking the caramelized top of her crème brûlée. Lucas had peppered me with questions about the Marine Corps, his eyes wide with admiration. Mia, ever the thoughtful one, had engaged Marcus in a surprisingly sophisticated conversation about what it took to run a successful restaurant. But as the evening drew to a close and servers began discreetly clearing dessert plates, I knew the night wasn't over yet. My family wouldn't let me leave without one final confrontation, a last attempt to regain control of a narrative that had slipped entirely from their grasp. I wasn't wrong. As Marcus excused himself to attend to other patrons, I saw my brother approaching our table, his expression a carefully composed mask of fraternal concern. "Alex," he said, his voice pitched to convey casual warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Could I have a word before you go?" I considered refusing, But glancing at the children's curious faces, I decided against creating any more drama in front of them. Of course, I replied, rising from my seat. Kids, I'll be right back. Are you in trouble again? Lucas asked with the directness only a child could muster. I smiled reassuringly. Not at all. My brother just wants to talk about grown-up business. James led me to a quiet corner near the coat check, the same spot where my mother had confronted me earlier. The symmetry wasn't lost on me. Quite the performance tonight, he began, his tone just shy of accusatory. It wasn't a performance, James. It was a scheduled business announcement that happened to coincide with the family dinner. He studied me with narrowed eyes. You could have told us, about the inheritance, about your business ventures. You deliberately kept us in the dark. Would it have made a difference? I challenged. Would knowing I had money have changed how you and our parents saw me? Would it have earned me a seat at the adult table tonight? James had the grace to look, momentarily discomfited. That's not fair, Alex. The seating arrangement was Mother's doing, not mine. And yet you said nothing, I pointed out. You delivered her message about the children's menu with quite a bit of satisfaction, as I recall. He shifted his weight, a tell from childhood that indicated discomfort with being called out. I may have been insensitive. Insensitive, I repeated. That's one word for it. Look, James said, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. What do you want from this? An apology? Public humiliation of the family? Because that part seems well underway. I shook my head, genuinely disappointed by his inability to see beyond the family's wounded pride. What I wanted, James, was basic respect. Recognition that my choices, though different from what our parents planned, had value. That my service to this country meant something. That my business acumen was worth acknowledging, even if it wasn't applied to Father's investment firm. And now you have that, he said flatly. Everyone in Boston society will know by tomorrow that Alexandra Blackwood, the black sheep daughter who defied Colonel Richard Blackwood to join the Marines, is now a secret millionaire and business mogul. There was something in his tone, a bitterness that seemed disproportionate to the evening's revelations. It took me a moment to recognize it for what it was. Jealousy. You're not upset that I kept secrets, I realized aloud. You're upset that I've been successful without following the Blackwood blueprint, that I built something on my own terms. James's jaw tightened. Don't be ridiculous. I run a multi-million-dollar investment firm. I'm hardly threatened by your restaurants. A firm that Father built and handed to you, I clarified. Along with his client list, his industry connections, and his business philosophy. You're doing exactly what he trained you to do, exactly the way he trained you to do it. Some of us appreciate family legacy, he snapped. Some of us understand the value of tradition. And some of us need to forge our own path, I countered. Tell me something, James. If you weren't a Blackwood, if you didn't have Father's name and connections behind you, what would you have built on your own? The question struck a nerve. I could see it in the way his expression shifted from indignation to something more vulnerable before he masked it again. We'll never know, will we? He replied coolly. Just as we'll never know if you would have achieved any of this without your dead Marine friend's money. The casual cruelty of the remark stung, but I refused to let it show. Eric's name was Captain Wilson, I said evenly. And he believed in me enough to leave me the means to build something meaningful? That's a legacy I honor every day through my businesses and our Veterans Foundation. James had the grace to look momentarily ashamed. I didn't mean... Yes. You did, I interrupted. That's the difference between us, James. You've always had someone clearing your path, someone whose approval validated your every move. I've had to find my own validation, my own measure of success. He shook his head, frustration evident in his expression. You always have to make everything so dramatic, so black and white. The rebellious daughter against the oppressive family. Has it ever occurred to you that maybe, just maybe, our parents wanted what was best for you? Their version of what was best, I corrected. A version that never took into account who I actually am or what I actually wanted. "And what do you want now?" he asked, his voice softer than before. "Now that you've made your point, humiliated the family, and established your independence once and for all, what comes next?" It was a fair question, one I hadn't fully considered in my focus on this evening. What did I want from my family now? Continued estrangement? Reconciliation on my terms? Something in between? "I want what I've always wanted," I said finally. "To be seen for who I am, not who anyone wished I would be. To have my choices respected, even when they differ from the prescribed Blackwood path. To be treated as an equal, not a disappointment." James studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. "You were never a disappointment to me, you know," he said quietly. "Frustrating, stubborn, impossible at times, but never a disappointment." The unexpected admission caught me off guard. James and I had been close as children, before the weight of Blackwood. Expectations had driven a wedge between us. He had embraced the golden child role while I had rejected it, our divergent choices pulling us further apart with each passing year. "You never said that," I replied, unable to keep the hint of accusation from my voice. "Neither of us has been particularly good at saying what matters," he acknowledged with a faint smile. Another Blackwood family tradition. Before I could respond, my father appeared at James's shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Your mother is ready to leave," he informed James before turning to me. "Alexandra, a word before we go." James glanced, between us, hesitating. "Father, perhaps we could—" "It's all right," I assured him. "We'll finish our conversation another time." He nodded, uncertainty flickering across his features before he retreated, leaving me alone with our father. "Colonel." Blackwood waited until James was out of earshot before speaking. "Your mother is quite upset," he began, as if this information should prompt immediate contrition on my part. "I imagine she is," I replied neutrally. My father's jaw worked silently for a moment, a gesture I recognized from childhood as his attempt to control his temper. "This evening didn't need to unfold this way," he said finally. "Had you simply informed us of your circumstances, appropriate adjustments could have been made." The phrasing was so typically Blackwood that I almost laughed. "Appropriate adjustments," I repeated. "You mean I would have been deemed worthy of the main table if you'd known I had money and status?" "That's unnecessarily cynical," he replied, stiffly. "Is it? Because from where I'm standing it seems perfectly accurate. I was relegated to the children's table because in your eyes, in Mother's eyes, I hadn't achieved anything worthy of adult status. My military service, my business success, none of it counted because it didn't align with the Blackwood definition of achievement." My father's expression hardened. "You've made your point, Alexandra, quite publicly. I assume that was the intended effect." "My point," I said carefully, "was never about public humiliation. It was about recognition, about respect. Things I've earned but never received from my family." "Respect is a two-way street," he countered. "You've shown precious little for family traditions or parental guidance over the years." I took a deep breath, recognizing the familiar pattern we were falling into. The same circular argument we'd had for over a decade, neither of us willing to truly hear the other. "You're right," I said, surprising us both. "I rejected the path you laid out for me. I chose differently. But that doesn't mean I don't respect what you built, Father. The discipline, the work ethic, the commitment to excellence, I carry those lessons with me every day. I just applied them to a different calling." Something shifted in his expression, not quite softening, but a certain rigidity easing away. "Your grandfather wanted me to take over his law practice," he said unexpectedly. "I enlisted instead, broke his heart. This was a piece of family history I'd never heard, a revelation that cast my own choices in a different light. I didn't know that. He didn't speak to me for 2 years, my father continued. Not until after my first deployment when I came, home with a Purple Heart and a promotion. The parallel to my own experience was striking. What changed his mind? He realized I had found my purpose, my father said simply. Different from what he'd planned, but purpose nonetheless. I studied my father's face, searching for signs of the young man who had once defied his own father to follow his calling. Somewhere beneath the stern exterior and rigid expectations was someone who had once stood where I stood, at a crossroads between family expectations and personal conviction. I never knew that about grandfather, I said softly. Why didn't you ever tell me? My father's gaze shifted away, focusing on some distant point beyond my shoulder. It wasn't relevant. Different times, different circumstances. It seems perfectly relevant to me, I countered. You chose your own path, just as I chose mine. You defied your father's expectations, just as I defied yours. The situations are hardly comparable, he insisted, though with less conviction than before. Military service is a noble tradition. Coffee shops and restaurants are... He trailed off, perhaps realizing how his dismissal would sound in light of the evening's revelations. Businesses that employ hundreds of people, including dozens of veterans who might otherwise struggle to find meaningful work, I finished for him. Enterprises that generate millions in revenue and contribute significantly to the local economy. Establishments that bring people together, create community, and honor the memory of a fallen Marine who believed in me enough to entrust me with his legacy. My father fell silent, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed something like recognition in his eyes, not of my achievements, but of the passion behind them, the sense of purpose that had driven me, just as his own sense of duty had propelled him into military service against his father's wishes. I've never understood you, Alexandra, he said finally, the admission clearly costing him something. Your choices, your priorities, they've always seemed foreign to me. Have you ever tried? I asked directly. Have you ever asked me about my business with genuine interest? Visited one of my coffee shops? Inquired about the Veterans Foundation? Or was it easier to dismiss what you didn't understand? He didn't answer immediately, which was itself a kind of answer. My father had always been quick to judge but slow to question his own judgments, particularly where his children were concerned. Perhaps I've been short-sighted, he conceded, the words clearly difficult for him. Your mother and I had certain expectations. When you deviated from them, you assumed I was failing rather than following a different path to success, I completed the thought. Success is more than financial, he noted, a hint of the old judgment creeping back into his tone. I agree completely, I said, surprising. Him. It's about purpose, impact, legacy. Things I've built through my businesses in ways that have nothing to do with the Blackwood name or connections. That was always the point, Father. Not rejecting you or the family, but finding my own way forward. My father glanced toward the main table, where my mother was gathering her things with deliberate precision, her displeasure evident even from a distance. Your mother may need more time to adjust her understanding. It was as close to an acknowledgement of my mother's rigid worldview as I'd ever heard from him. And you? I asked. What do you need? He straightened, the military bearing reasserting itself. I would like to see these businesses of yours. Not the restaurants. I'm familiar enough with the Sapphire Room. But your coffee company. This Black Dog operation. The request was unexpected, and I couldn't quite suppress my surprise. You want to visit Black Dog? Is that so difficult to believe? He asked, a hint of defensiveness returning to his voice. Honestly? Yes, I admitted. You've spent years dismissing it as irrelevant. That was before I knew the full scope of the enterprise, he replied, the qualifier revealing that his interest remained tied to scale and financial success rather than the passion behind the business. Still, it was something, a crack in the fortress of judgment he had built around my choices. A small opening that might, with time, widen into genuine understanding. I'd be happy to give you a tour, I said. Perhaps after the holidays. Our flagship location in Cambridge includes the roastery and training center. You could see the entire operation. He nodded briskly as if we were concluding a business meeting rather than attempting to bridge a decade-long divide. That would be acceptable. From anyone else, the response would have seemed cold, even dismissive. From Colonel Richard Blackwood, it represented a significant concession, perhaps even the beginning of respect. "Merry Christmas, Father," I said, offering a small olive branch of my own. He hesitated, then nodded again. "Merry Christmas, Alexandra." After a brief pause, he added, "You've built something substantial. That much is evident." It wasn't effusive praise or a heartfelt apology for years of dismissal. It wasn't even a direct acknowledgement of being wrong. But from my father, it was significant, a reluctant recognition that perhaps, just perhaps, my path had merit after all. As he turned to rejoin my mother, I felt a weight lifting, not completely, but enough to notice the difference. The approval I had once desperately sought no longer seemed so crucial. What mattered more was the acknowledgement, however grudging, that I had found my purpose and pursued it successfully on my own terms. I returned to the children's table, where Emma, Lucas, and Mia were finishing the last bites of their desserts. "Is everything okay?" Mia asked, her perceptiveness beyond her years. "Yes," I replied, surprised to find that I meant it. "Everything is just fine." As the Blackwood family gathering dispersed, my parents departing with minimal further interaction, I found Marcus near the kitchen, overseeing the evening's final service. "Mission accomplished?" he asked, noting my thoughtful expression. "Not exactly," I replied honestly, "but perhaps a beginning rather than an ending." He nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. Family reconciliations are rarely tied up with neat bows, especially after years of misunderstanding. "My father wants to tour Black Dog," I said, still somewhat amazed by this development. "See the operation for himself." Marcus smiled. "A soldier, conducting reconnaissance on unfamiliar territory." "Exactly," I agreed with a laugh. "Assessing the enemy's position, or perhaps," Marcus suggested gently, a father trying to understand his daughter's world. I considered this more generous interpretation. Maybe. Time will tell. As the restaurant emptied and the staff began the careful choreography of closing, for the night I took a final moment to appreciate the irony of the evening. What had begun as an attempt to put me in my place, relegated to the children's table as a symbol of my perceived failure, had transformed into a powerful affirmation of the path I had chosen. The children's table, intended as a site of humiliation, had instead become a place of genuine connection and authenticity, qualities notably absent from the strained interactions at the main table. The very restaurant my parents had selected as the backdrop for my diminishment had revealed itself as a testament to my success, and the family that had never quite seen me had finally been forced to look, not just at what I had achieved, but at their own failure to recognize the value in choices different from their own. As I prepared to leave, Marcus walked me to the door. "Same time next year?" he asked with a knowing smile, "though perhaps at a different table." I laughed, the sound unburdened by the weight of expectation I had carried for so long. "Actually, I was thinking we might host Christmas dinner at Black's Dog next year. Show the family a different kind of elegance." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Bold move." "I've never been one for half measures," I reminded him. "Besides, it's time the Blackwoods experienced life outside their comfort zone. They might even learn something." "About coffee?" he asked. "About me," I replied. about the world I've built that they've never bothered to see. As I stepped into the crisp December night, I felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with family approval and everything to do with personal validation. The path I had chosen, winding and unexpected, as it had been, had led me exactly where I needed to be. The children's table had been meant as my place of exile. Instead, it had become the final confirmation that I had found my rightful place in the world, not at the table others set for me, but at the one I had built for myself. 1 year later, I stood at the entrance of Black Dog's flagship location, surveying the transformation. The industrial chic space with its exposed brick and gleaming copper roasting equipment had been adorned with tasteful holiday decorations, fresh pine garlands, subtle white lights, and small touches of red that complemented our brand colors. The long communal tables had been arranged into one elegant configuration, set with fine dinnerware that maintained the unpretentious warmth of the space. "Everything looks perfect," Marcus said, appearing at my side. After our successful London opening, we had become not just business partners, but genuine friends. Very different from the Sapphire Room, but perfect in its own way. "That's the idea," I replied, adjusting a place card at the head of the table, my father's name written in elegant calligraphy. The past year had brought unexpected changes to the Blackwood family dynamics. My father had indeed toured Black Dog, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to grudging admiration for the operation's efficiency and scale. My mother had remained distant until the feature in Forbes highlighted our veterans' employment program, bringing social recognition. She finally understood. James had surprised me most, investing in our newest venture, a line of ready-to-drink coffees that had quickly gained national distribution. The bell above the door chimed, and Emma burst in, now 9 and wearing a Marine Corps t-shirt beneath her winter coat. "Cousin Alex, I brought my school project to show you." Behind her came my Aunt Patricia and Uncle David, followed by Lucas and Mia, all carrying carefully wrapped gifts. Then more relatives, each entering this space, my space, with curious eyes and tentative smiles. Last to arrive were my parents. My father in his perfectly pressed suit, my mother elegant as always, both slightly uncomfortable in this unfamiliar territory but making the effort. Progress measured in small steps. "Alexandra," my father said formally, extending his hand. "Impressive setting. Different from our usual Christmas venue," my mother added, her tone neutral but not disapproving. I smiled. Different can be good. As everyone found their places, no children's table this year, but one continuous arrangement where generations mixed freely, I took my position at the opposite end from my father. A symbolic choice, equal in stature, different in approach. "Before we begin," I said, raising my glass once everyone was seated, "I want to thank you all for coming to Black Dog for Christmas this year. This place represents not just my business, but my belief that we find our purpose in unexpected places." I met my father's gaze directly. Someone wise once told me that success is about more than finances. It's about purpose, impact, and legacy. I couldn't agree more. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, followed by the faintest nod, an acknowledgement of ground gained, of mutual respect slowly growing. "To family," I said, raising my glass higher. "In all its complicated, evolving forms." "To family," they echoed, Emma's enthusiastic voice rising above the rest. As conversations began to flow around the table, I caught Marcus's approving glance. From where he sat with Emma, already deep in conversation about her latest school project. This was victory, not the triumph of humiliation I had once imagined, but the quieter win of creating a new table entirely, one where everyone had a place, and no one needed to be diminished for others to feel tall.